be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I apologize. I am going to restart that.
Okay, no problem.
I swear I put this on. There we go. Let's try that one more time. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have with me a very special guest, Dr. Megan Buning, former collegiate athlete as well as a professional athlete, and now currently working with the Florida State University and part of the faculty with FSU Coach. She is a former coach, an educator, a certified mental performance coach. So she brings a lot to the table as far as covering the areas that it's necessary to improve upon to develop our greatness. So that's kind of where we're going to go today. Thank you so much, Dr. Buning, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is exciting. I always love to talk about what I do.
Absolutely. So what I want to start with today is I saw that you recently attended your 12-year-old daughter's first volleyball match. And I want to know, tell me about that experience for you, being in the stands instead of on the sidelines.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My daughter, of course, she always gets, do you play softball? And that was my sport. She's never been interested in it. She is our artsy music, lizard loving girl. And so we finally got her interested in a sport, and it's volleyball. And I had never attended a volleyball game because I've always been busy playing or coaching. And I always was worried about, was I going to be a sideline coach, even though I was going to try not to be. And I loved it. There were so many similarities between softball and volleyball, just in the intensity, the energy, the pace. And I just was very proud of her. She got cut from the team last year. And so this year she made it and actually got quite a bit of playing time. And I just found myself cheering for things I didn't know what I was cheering for. And it was a blast.
That's awesome. There's a lot of things in that I appreciate. And one is not being a sideline coach, because I have two young kids and that is my greatest fear. I'm like, do I sit behind the fence? Like, how far away do I have to be so I'm not chirping in their ear? Because I want to put faith in the coaches to do their job. But at the same time, having experience like we have, coaching and playing at a high level, how did you bite your tongue? How did you not jump in and say things when you saw stuff that you were like, we should probably do that different?
Yeah. Well, some of it was like you said, I mean, we know how that feels, right? And then some of it actually, which we'll probably talk some about, is just from my training and education in the mental performance. So that sports psych world, when I work with clients and with athletes, and even just myself personally, I do a lot with mindfulness. And so it was just me being mindful of where I was, being present in that moment, and making sure that I was checking my thoughts and what I was saying before I said them. I also think it helps that she's playing a sport that I'm not very familiar with. So I don't really know what to say.
I could see that being beneficial. Like, if my son decides to play tennis or something like that, I'm be like, perfect. Go get it. Hit the ball over the net.
Yeah, you got it over.
Right. So you mentioned mindfulness, and that's actually a very interesting thing. I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that I keep hearing a lot about but I'm not super familiar with it. And I don't really fully understand, I guess, the concept of it. I mean, obviously I want to be present when I'm doing things. And that's a big part of, I think, the mindfulness stuff that we're getting a lot of information about. However, where do we start if we're trying to, I guess, dive in ourselves to being more mindful? Where does that begin for?
Yeah, so this is a really great topic. And I think just for your listeners, over the next couple of years, maybe even months, you're going to start seeing even more in the mindful coaching. I know a lot of researchers are really starting to hit it, as well as mental performance and psychologists, that kind of thing. So mindfulness is part of that deeper level of meditation. So if you do yoga or you practice meditation, you will hear mindfulness as a piece of it. Mindfulness by itself is, just as simply as I can put it, is being present in the moment for a particular reason without judgment or evaluation of whatever's going on. So when you think about, just to kind of put that in perspective, when you're working with an athlete and maybe they do something and it's disobedient, or they've broken a rule or something like that, or you have a bad experience yourself with whatever they've done, you have to think about what are the lens that are covering your eyes? What are your bias that you're seeing that may influence how you react to that athlete doing something that you don't like? Okay. So when we are mindful, the first thing that we work on is we work on bringing our attention to what is going on. When am I losing focus? When am I thinking about something else? And at first it seems like it's all the time, but the first step is becoming aware. If you're not aware of what you're doing, you can't fix it. We talk about that with athletes all the time. So we work with just paying attention. So if I'm here speaking with you, or if your listeners are listening right now, truly zero in on the words I'm saying and what I'm saying, and try to do that without judging what I'm saying or evaluating what I'm saying. So I just want to hear, like I'm a vessel. I just want to hear. And so there are things that we can do to kind of help track when we're losing that attention, and particularly to get out of that judging and evaluating piece. Now, as coaches, we have to judge and we have to evaluate, but there are times when we have to just see the situation for what it is, so that then I don't have a lens covering my response. I can make a response based off of simply what I see here, right? Versus maybe something I didn't want to say or mean to say, or that probably isn't great for whomever I'm trying to say it to. So basically, it just starts with knowing that you're losing focus, you're losing attention, or that you're judging and evaluating. And then let's bring ourselves into awareness. So we recognize we're losing focus. We admit it. Okay. So the first step is acknowledge it. I hate when people use that example, think of a pink elephant. Okay. And then what happens? Or, don't think of a pink elephant. Sorry. Don't think of a pink elephant. And then what do they think happens is people think of a pink elephant. That makes me cringe. I don't think of a pink elephant because I never do that. I think it's dumb. So, when we're talking about losing focus, it's more about not trying to not do something. We've got to acknowledge that we're doing it. So I'm losing focus. My attention's here, or my thoughts are over here, or I'm judging. I'm admitting that, and now I'm intentionally going to redirect where I need to be so I can see and be present. And you go through that process, and eventually you get to where you can automatically do it, but it doesn't, you constantly have to practice it. It just gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. It sounds to me like a story I heard recently about Kobe Bryant. He was talking about how he was in a game, and it was at the end of the game, and a shot went up, and he watched the shot. He just stood there and watched it. And then while he's watching the shot, the guy he's supposed to be boxing out rebounds the ball, puts the ball back in, and he loses the game. Later the next day, he was in class. So this must have been in high school that the story was going on, because he's sitting in class and he finds himself paying attention for a moment. And then all of a sudden he wanders and he goes, wait, that's what happened when I missed my opportunity to box out and win the game. Is that mindfulness working in that sense right there?
Well, if he's sitting in class and he's thinking about that shot, then he's lost focus.
Yeah. But
So I get what you're saying. Yeah. So if he made that shot and he was in the moment, he was probably in a zone, but he was stuck in a different, we call them attentional focus quadrants. All right.
Okay.
So he was stuck in a quadrant where he needed to make the shot and then redirect his attention to playing defense, boxing.
Actually, I think I misspoke there. He was on defense. The guy shot and he just watched the shot go up as he was on defense, and his opponent rebounded an offensive rebound and scored. So it was one of those, he wasn't in the moment. He was watching the game and thinking about other things, much like what he realized when he was in class, where he was sitting there, instead of paying attention, he was sitting there thinking and daydreaming about other things. Was that his realization of mindfulness in that moment? Obviously, he wasn't mindful in that moment. He wasn't in the moment.
Sure.
But
yeah.
It sounds like he realized it.
Yeah. And so the way you reframe that, I think that is an example of when he was not being present in the moment. So, and you can see that's a great example too, of especially when you're first learning how to practice mindfulness. He had a delayed reaction, right? So a delayed acknowledgement. It was the next day.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And sometimes that can happen. So then his next step should have, or maybe was, I realized that I wasn't focused on the shot and what I should be doing. And he still was probably stuck in an attentional focus quadrant that he shouldn't have been in. And so now he says, I know what happened. Now, this time when I go back out, I'm aware that I did that or that I do that. And so I'm going to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again, or at least not for as long as a period, right? When you're practicing mindfulness, the thing I think people get frustrated with is we're not asking you to be fully aware and in the moment all the time. You can't. And so you have to train your brain of when do I need to be. We actually need to have times when we're not thinking about things and when we're just downtime. That's part of a healthy brain. And that's where, like what you were talking about with Kobe, now he was in class and he had this moment, but connections are made. And so you've got to have that time where you're not fully present in the moment so that creativity, the connections can be made too.
Yeah, I've heard that we only have so much time that we can put intentional focus on something before we need a break. And I believe you actually posted something not long ago during the Olympics where there was a guy knitting in the stands and taking a break. Talk to me a little bit about why we only have such a limited focus and how we can utilize breaks to maybe extend that focus or maximize it even more.
Sure. So that's just the way that your brain is wired. And it gets into that, what I've been mentioning, attentional focus. So that comes from Niederfer's attentional focus. And it's a big theory that's out there. And basically what you're talking about, and I think this is where folks get confused, it's helpful for coaches and for athletes to understand the quadrants so that they know when they should be shifting out of quadrants, and they all intertwine. All right. But basically that very narrow internal focus, for instance, in your example, when Kobe saw the shot go up, he was very narrowly focused on what was going on with that shot. And we can only hold that for a matter of seconds just because our brain can't hold that. We've got other things we need to do. And so during a game, we fluctuate between these 4 different quadrants. Some of them are broad, some of them are really narrow, some of them are internal, some of them are external on what we're focusing on. And we need to move through all of those. But then after the game, let me back up. So in the game, I can't be really narrow internal focused except for a matter of seconds. I just can't do it. And then, so I'm going to fluctuate. I'm still focused on the game, but maybe I've got a broad external perspective here, broad street view of what's going on. So I go back and forth, but then after the game, I'm tired. My brain is tired. And so I need that rest. This is another reason why you see so many sleep studies and how athletes in particular need a minimum, I think it's like 8 hours of sleep, and some need more. Not only is it for physical recovery, it's for mental recovery. Even when coaches, I know a lot of coaches are educators, and maybe they're even students that we have in our programs, they're learning new content, maybe new connections are being made. Their brain has to have time to make those connections. And so when you give that downtime, it allows for those connections to be made.
Can you go a little deeper on what are the 4 quadrants? Because I feel like that's an important piece of this conversation that I don't know what they all are. But I understand when you're talking about them, how you flow between different states of focus and because I felt it myself as an athlete and as a coach, but I don't know what they're called. So maybe we can go a little deeper on that.
Yeah. And you're editing this, right?
I will edit this. Yes.
Let me just pull this up. I'll send you some stuff if you like. I don't know if you ever post things with your podcast, but I'll send you the quadrant model.
Okay.
I just want to find a good one. I want to make sure I'm okay. All right, so the attentional focus quadrants that I'm talking about, if you think about a graph, you have your X and your Y axis, right? And that's kind of how these quadrants are laid out. So for instance, you're going to see something that's called a broad external. So we call this kind of a street sense view of where our focus is. So we're just getting a broad lay of the land. So give me a sport that you want to use, for example, unless you want to just go with basketball.
Let's just stick with basketball. We've been on that topic, so we'll kind of stay in that realm, even though that's not my sport.
Sure. Sure. So if we think about Kobe and basketball, and we think about this broad external view. So this might be when he's standing on the sidelines and he's trying to get a lay of how the defense is shifting, what's going on with communication, and he's focusing outside of himself. All right. So he's just trying to get a street sense, almost like what you think a quarterback or a catcher might do. Okay. Broad street sense. And so again, that's broad external. Well, then we have this other quadrant where it's broad internal. So we go from street sense, and then we're focused on things outside of ourselves of what's going on. But then we move to this internal focus, but we're still broad. So this would be where we're trying to maybe analyze what we need to do. So for instance, if you have basketball, you might be thinking about, well, what plays might work. All right. So how do I want to call? Because, point guards, especially at Kobe's level, they call the plays, right? So, or if you're in golf, what club you might want to use for how you want to get the ball to go. All right. So that's broad internal. Well, then you have these two other quadrants that are considered more narrow senses of focus. So a narrow but external focus would be where you're actually executing the skill, the movement. All right. So this is that physical action. So this is Kobe actually shooting the ball or trying to, which he didn't do, get into that blocking position. And then you have a narrow internal view. So this is where you are going through problem solving. You're trying to work through problems. This is where you might see you're visualizing, which Kobe, I know, did. A lot of the NBA athletes do. They visually rehearse what it is that they want to do. They're checking with their breathing, that kind of thing. Now that internal but broad is sometimes goes with that external narrow. And I know I'm talking a lot of internal and external. So I'm going to send you a visual, and I'll also link you to a video that was done through our Association for Applied Sports Psychology. One of the presenters did an excellent job. She uses a light board and she really breaks down the quadrants. And so what you see a lot of times is, and it sounds like maybe Kobe, without speaking to him, I'm guessing here, is that he kind of got stuck, that trap in the analyzing phase. And so you see a lot of athletes do this, and even coaches sometimes. Yeah. We're so caught up in analyzing the defense or trying to plan what we're gonna do next that we forget to shift into that narrow internal and actually see the ball come in or catch the ball or move into that next phase. And then it's too late, like what you described with Kobe. So being aware of what these quadrants are and what they mean, again, it's kind of like that mindfulness. You're just bringing yourself into that awareness stage so that you may realize, like Kobe did, oh, I'm stuck analyzing and the play's already moved past, and here's what happened. So you can work on when you kind of need to be shifting and moving in between those quadrants.
Do you think for coaches, knowing these quadrants could help them plan a practice to work through the different quadrants and different drills so that they understand what it looks like and how it feels from a player's perspective? Do you think that's beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you had asked me this while I was coaching back in the day, I would have been kind of like you, like, what are you talking about? But when you hear the quadrants, and you need to listen to the link I'm going to give you a couple of times so that you can kind of get a handle on them. But once you get a handle on them, it completely makes sense. And you can start seeing it in your athletes when your catcher behind the plate drops the pitch coming in, because then you find out she or he is thinking about, well, I was focused on what the runner was going to do instead of watching the ball come in. Well, they're in that analyzing phase. They need to be in that narrow. Some of the athletes too like to think in those terms. And so explaining the quadrants to them, some of the athletes are going to be like, whatever. And some of them need to hear it that way. So I think it absolutely benefits. And for a coach, you can start paying attention of when you're kind of in that analyzing phase and the plays happen and you don't know what happened.
I definitely have had that before, where I'm watching something so narrowly, I'm paying attention to something so small because it was something that I felt was important. And then in the moment, I forget that I'm responsible for all of these other things. And then the play happens and I'm like, hey, what just happened right there? Did we do good? Because I was really narrow focused in that moment. And it wasn't a bad thing, because obviously in baseball and softball, you can do that for a moment, especially as a coach, and it's not going to like ruin the game, because there's no real back and forth like other sports where like change of possession happens quickly and all of a sudden you're like, wait, we're 3 possessions. What happened? What did I miss? You might have missed a pitch or two.
Absolutely. I've done that when I had to call pitches. It's, I'm so far ahead thinking about how to set the hitter up that I miss the pitch that actually happened sometimes. Or I've even been so far in my head that I've missed if the hitter swung or, where the ball went when they hit it. And so as a coach, you've got to be aware. And I think you can train not only yourself, but your athletes to say, here's what's happening. You're only at this part of the game, you're only going to have a split second. So you need to be moving out. We can process what happened later and help them understand that we'll come back to it. But in this part, you got to be moving.
I love that. I think that that's some valuable stuff for not only players, but coaches to be able to flow in and out of the different quadrants. And to be successful, you have to figure out how to balance that out and work through that. So very cool. I want to transition a little bit here. I've heard some terminology, and I want to make sure I get some clarification, because I think that they're getting thrown around and jumbled together too often. And I think that's something that's dangerous here. So I've heard mental health, mental conditioning, mental illness. How do we differentiate between them?
I think that's a really great question. And again, I'm just going to bring up the certification that I hold is a certified mental performance consultant. It's through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. And then you'll also see some great resources from the American Psychological Association and the American Counseling Association, so the ACA. The reason I bring that up is because they do try to distinguish between what those terms mean. So let's start with mental health. Mental health is kind of this broad look at how are we doing, and just mentally, how are we handling our emotions, our responses, that kind of thing. So I have my broad kind of bag of mental health. And then if I look at a mental illness, this is where something within my brain or an emotion or within that broad bag of mental health, something isn't functioning correctly. So when we talk about mental illness, we talk about if you think you're struggling with mental illness, this is something you just can't get by. You may even be having if I look at the kind of severe take of it, the suicidal ideations, maybe you're struggling with an eating disorder, severe depression, anxiety, those sorts of things. Any type of abuse would put somebody maybe into a mental illness. But those sorts of, it is what it is. It's an illness that you just need help with. And so you go and you seek help from a licensed either counselor or a licensed psychologist. And then if you really want to get clinical and you think you need medication, the ones that can prescribe medication right now are the psychiatrist. All right. So there's a distinction there. Your psychologist and your counselors can treat mental illness, but they're going to treat them with behavior modifications. All right. Most of the time, they cannot prescribe medications. Mental conditioning comes in with what you see with what I can work with. So this is the mental performance consultants. We are not licensed counselors a lot. Some are. And if you hold just a CNPC, you're not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist. So the mental performance consultants can deal with mental conditioning. So this is where we can work with athletes or not even athletes. I work with clients outside of athletics. So this is life, right? Businesses, therapists, that kind of thing. We work with folks to learn, how do we help you perform better, right? So you're not dealing with what would be considered a diagnosable situation. So you don't need to see a licensed professional, but maybe you're having trouble with focus. Maybe you have something going on that is nutrition centered, and we can, to an extent, unless I have a nutrition some type of degree or certification, I may have to refer you, but I can do some work with that. Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's a confidence or a fear of failure, and we haven't reached that threshold of diagnosable. Okay, so we go by the DSM-5 and we know when to refer. So you have that again, that broad bag of mental health that kind of contains all your emotions, your thoughts, your confidence, and all that kind of stuff. And then if something is wrong and it can be considered diagnosable, you need to seek help of a licensed professional. That would fall kind of in that mental illness. And then you have the mental conditioning, which is something that's not diagnosable that we can help, that might get you to where you're performing better. So does that help clarify?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Now, my follow-up question would be, the situation that happened with Simone Biles at the Olympics, would that land in one of these categories? Would we call that a mental illness at that point from a performance standpoint? And obviously it's not to the point where depression and eating disorders of that nature, but would it qualify as a mental illness in that situation? Or is it more of a lack in mental health and maybe some poor mental conditioning that has caused her to get in her own way?
Yeah, so I think it's her situation, just from what I recall from it, is a combination of things. So she had some like she would definitely need to seek the help of a licensed counselor or psychologist, at least. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about the person's background. So anybody that has experienced any type of abuse you got to watch them. So, and she had been a part of that Larry Nassar, I hate even saying his name, but that whole debacle, right? So you have to consider things like that. She was also experiencing, I think she had lost an aunt while she was in Tokyo. She lost a family member, I know. So she experienced death, and then she experienced death while she's across the world, and then trying to compete. So you had to look at that. So a death would not necessarily mean that you need to seek the help of a licensed professional. Although if they're having problems dealing with the grief, then go talk to a licensed counselor or a licensed psychologist. They can help you get through that grief. That's a temporary thing that wouldn't be considered necessarily mental illness. And when I think about a mental illness, I also think about things like your schizophrenia, your personality disorders, those sorts of things, where somebody can be struggling. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of other factors that are contributing to this stress and this anxiety. So stress is going to be more long-term, where anxiety is not quite as long-term. And I don't think there's a mental illness there, but they need to seek help to work through some of those things. So just because I think we have to be careful of using the term mental illness, because people don't like it. And just because I'm going to speak to somebody that's even licensed doesn't mean I have a mental illness. It means that I may have some issues going on that are at a deeper level, that just needs somebody that's licensed to talk to.
Right. Okay. No, I feel like we get sometimes caught up when we hear mental illness. We think, like you said, schizophrenia or some type of severe situation. where it doesn't necessarily always have to be that way. And, you know, we spend all this time as athletes and as coaches training our bodies and training our minds and doing all these things to perform, but we don't condition ourselves to handle the adversities and the stresses and the things that come along the way. And you have breaks, you know, and you have things that kind of all of a sudden you're like, I was doing this so well and now I can't. What's stopping me? Because it's typically not a physical problem at that point. We have something mentally, you know, disrupting our performance. And so I liked your take on it being multiple pieces. And I didn't know about the family member having to deal with that, because obviously I'm sure that's a huge emotional trigger that then led to a number of other things happening that were out of her control. But I think that's an interesting piece. And obviously I don't like using her as an example all the time because it's hard on her. It's not fair to her, but she is someone at the pinnacle of her sport. So obviously it draws more attention when you see somebody who's been so successful still struggle with the mental stuff. And I think that's the valuable piece for all of us going forward, is that, you know, no matter how strong you think you are or how strong you've been in the past, it's always good to have somebody on your team who can work you through the mental side of the game.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up in particular, because, you know, when you look at a famous athlete like that, and with her situation, you know, it wasn't just the death of a family member and then her past history with the abuse, but everybody got hit with the COVID year and years. So you think about you know, even me, I look back and I think, well, I wasn't coaching, but I was having to work with athletes and I was having to work with students. We had to flip some things online, and I didn't lose my job. I kept working, but I did have to flip things differently. I had to help the students that I was working with, many of them coaches that were having a really tough time. My children had to be at home virtual learning. I moved out of state, started a new job. I mean, there was just tons. And so I even recognized that, you know what, I was just getting through and I was surviving, and I didn't realize until recently that it was catching up with me too. And so you have to, I think we need, especially in the coaching world, we need to be better about allowing folks that are trained to come in and help. And I'll kind of state a case here. So in the couple of things here in the sports psychology world, we've gotten away from using the term psychology because of the stigma. And people think, and even when I was coming up, they made me go see the one sports psychologist that was on the South Carolina staff because I had broken my ankle, and they thought I needed to speak with somebody, and I fought it and I hated it and I didn't get anything out of it. And I wish that I had been better, but at that time it was the stigma. So they've started using the term mental performance. And then with the with the certification, it's consultant now. And so you still have your licensed psychologist, but they're still using that term mental performance versus sports psych a lot of times. And something for coaches to know is the term psychologist and counselors are protected terms. So you can only use them when you're licensed in the United States. But when you look at coaches in any profession, really, you know, this may even lead into the programs that FSU Coach is now offering. We're offering, and as you have, a graduate degree in athletic coaching. So our hope is that, and I'm coming back to what I was getting on, okay, but our hope is that when coaches go out into the field, they now have a degree in athletic coaching. So when you think about that in the rigor of our field, when you bring folks in to work with your teams, or if you're considering it, which you should be, why not bring folks that have the training and the expertise in that area versus you who may not have the expertise, or bringing somebody else that doesn't in to work with somebody or your athletes. And so I guess the whole point of that is to say that we as coaches need to get better at understanding there are people that are trained to do specific things, to work with your teams on the mental side of the game. Now, also with that being said, you need to think about, do you just need the consultant? So we don't think we have any diagnosable issues, and we just want to come and work on some things that we think could boost us, whether it's you as the coaches or the athletes. I will tell you that those that are certified are trained to recognize when it's time to refer. So if we deal with, we run across some indicators, we're going to refer to a licensed professional. So there are options out there now that weren't there before, even when I went through. And so I think that coaches need to be better. There are more things that we can do for athletes, and it's time to stop with the old school card in this situation.
No, I think there's some evolutions to the coaching world and to the mental performance and to how we do things that, you're right, the old school way blocks us from wanting to advance the way things are done. We don't like change. I think as a human nature, we don't like change. It's uncomfortable. It makes us uncertain, and it causes some issues. One of the things that stood out to me in that story you were telling there is the fact that you mentioned when you were told to go talk to somebody, you didn't see any value in it. You were against it completely. And it made me think about the idea, like when you said, when coaches don't want to bring people in, is we have this ability to look at things through a lens of this is how I see the world. And it's not always an accurate view of things. We have this distortion of what we're looking at. And we think that, this is the way it's done. This is the way that's right. This is the way we've always done it. How do we know if we're looking at things through a proper lens or if we're seeing things through a distorted view? Like, that's one of the hard things, because a lot of times I don't think we realize, like, well, I'm looking at it this way and this is the right way. And obviously I think this is a bigger picture problem. And I think it relates to a lot of what we have going on in our society, even, is we're looking through things through our own personal lens and we're not able to take those filters off. So how do we get away from that?
So what you just did is you loop back into mindfulness practice. So remember part of that mindfulness is being present in the moment without judging or evaluating, right? So if you are actively practicing mindfulness, you're asking yourself, okay, somebody just mentioned bringing Megan in to work with the team on mental performance. And I just had a knee-jerk reaction. I just had a reaction to that. So instead of me reacting, so that immediate response of no, not doing that, or I don't know her, or I don't like that, that's, tree hugging, whatever you want to call it, frou-frou stuff. Instead of having that reaction, I stop for a second. And I say, okay, I just had this reaction. Now let me think about what is really causing that reaction. And if you take a few minutes, sometimes it's a few seconds, sometimes it's a few minutes to really track back. And this is something that we practice with mindfulness, track back to what you think really caused that reaction. And what you may find, like in my situation, my initial reaction would have been based on what happened in college when I was forced to go and I saw it was no value. And so when I track it back and I realize that has nothing to do with what this person can do. It's not related. So I go through this process. Is it related? No, it's not. It's not the same person. It's, 20 years later, that kind of thing. And so you kind of have that process. And so if you are practicing mindfulness, you are stopping yourself from reacting, thinking through a few things for a second, and you're buying yourself time to create a better informed response versus that reaction. And again, you see why that's a process, right? So we do that with emotions, we do that with thoughts. Another thing that can help is to use your staff, or use what we call in education now, we call them critical friends. And I love that term because it's more than mentors. It's different. It's people that have the expertise and that you can trust. They may not even be in the coaching field. It's probably better if they're not, that you can reach out to and say, this happened, now shoot it to me straight. Or I'm thinking about doing this. What are your thoughts? Can you give me an evaluation on this? And so we have a network of, the ones that work in your profession. So maybe that they're on your staff, maybe they're in the same position as you are. So maybe it's another head coach, whatever. And then you have people that you can reach out to that aren't close friends and family, but they're critical friends. You've got to be careful. You need the close friends and family because you need that support, but you also need to be aware of who's going to tell you what you want to hear versus who's going to shoot it to you straight. And so surround yourself with those people. And I think those are just two quick ways that you can work. But listen, this stuff sounds really common sense and it sounds easy. Then why are we not doing it more? It's because it's not. It takes effort and it takes time and it takes the willingness to admit that you need to get better at it. And And so that's where we run into a problem.
Yeah. I always love the quote, it's simple, not easy.
Right.
You know? It sounds simple, but it doesn't make it easy. You have to put in the work, you have to put in the time, you have to commit to doing it daily and be aware of it. And I love the idea of getting critical friends outside of your profession, because I think, again, that takes away the lens. You know, even if you have critical friends who are in the coaching world and you're dealing with a situation with your team and you go, man, this player's doing this, this, and this, and I just really want to do this. They're going to look at it and go, well, yeah, if my player was doing this, I'd probably do that too. Or if you get somebody who's not in coaching, they go, are you sure you want to do that? Doesn't sound very nice, or whatever it may be. Like, whatever your response is, they're looking at it from a different lens, which then takes away the bias, the approach of, well, this is how coaches do it. And I think that's a valuable piece, is finding people from different walks of life that are going to shoot it to you straight and give you information and advice that you can then apply with different thoughts, you know, the different perspectives.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned, or realizations that I learned when I left coaching, so I left back in 2011 from the collegiate setting, and it really opened my eyes, because I went from coaching in collegiate setting to higher education, so faculty. So you want to talk about some different worlds there. But what I realized is that as a coach, I was living in a bubble world. So we were always surrounded by like-minded people and coaches, even if they were different sports and the athletes were different, we're still all very, very similar. And so we're all going to say similar things. We can learn still from our similars. But when I stepped out of that bubble, I realized a lot of things about myself and about the way I was doing things, a lot that I carried over into academia, which you should have seen some looks on some faculty's faces when I did that. But I also realized that we behave in weird ways as coaches, and we behave in ways that if we try to do that outside of coaching, doesn't really go over well. And so I had to really look at myself and change some of the things I was doing for the better. And so now when I see, so I do some broadcasting for the digital stations of the SEC network and the ACC network, and it's softball. And it's been really interesting, because now I'm coming from a perspective of, I was a coach, I was an athlete, I was a researcher, I'm a mental performance consultant, but I know that I'm not in that bubble anymore. And I see a lot of things that I was doing or thinking. And if I had not gotten out of that bubble and created the other friends outside, I don't know where I would be. So, you know, and even with what I do now, and what that taught me is to have those critical friends. So even when I work in mental performance and I work in faculty, I learn so much from the folks that are in other professions. And you'll see that's a common theme of some of the most successful people. You know, we always get this question, why are people so successful? And when they do studies and when they interview them, they talk a lot about how much they learn from outside of their profession.
You know, I think that's a hard part for us as human beings. We tend to align ourselves with people who act like us, talk like us, look like us, do these things like us. But all it does is reinforce the things that we do well and do bad. Like, so they become more and more dramatic. And the people who have the ability to step away from that and look outside of their bubble of who they want to be like and align with and all these different things, and you start to listen and you start to pay attention to that other world out there, you become more well-rounded. You have a better sense of self. You are able to look at things that you do and go, ooh, yeah, we probably should change that. That's probably something we should work on. But if you don't have that influence, you never get shown the light. You don't look in the mirror and see that reflection that goes and says, hey, that's not what you want to be. And I think that's something that we should encourage a lot of people. I mean, everyone should probably start to look for people outside of their normal sphere and have those hard conversations, those difficult moments.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about bringing in too many voices. I'm talking about strategically finding folks that you need to build a relationship with. And you may want to have one or two folks where you don't really know, but you know they know their stuff, and you reach out to them. But ultimately, when it comes down, you have to be comfortable. And if you're not ready to hear something that you don't want to hear, and you're just going to shut them out, again, comes back to that mindfulness, then you're not ready. And so you need to kind of look at yourself first and figure it out from there, because it's not easy. It was not easy getting out of coaching. And then it was not easy hearing some things that I didn't want to hear, but that's where you learn. And I try to work with athletes in the consulting way and with the coaches I teach now. You got to be, as a matter of fact, as one of the assignments in it's a coaching theory and practice of coaching course. I have them do a mental performance exercise where they do a performance profile wheel. And then they are asked to reach out to somebody to evaluate them as a coach on, specific things that they identify. So they reach out to somebody they know well, and then they reach out to somebody that is in that kind of professional, I know you, but not super well. And then they get an evaluation and have to reflect on it.
I think that's going to be super valuable for them to, one, learn what they thought was who they were. And if it's true, and that's great. But if not, and there's things that come back and you're like, wow, I really do that. That's a really eye-opening moment to make change, to go a different direction. So obviously I could probably talk to you for another 45 minutes to an hour, but I want to be respectful of your time. So what I want to do now is I want to give you an opportunity to leave the listeners with a way to connect with you, to follow what you're doing next, to maybe look into FSU Coach and things of that nature.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. For anybody that wants some help, or you just want to talk, you can reach out to me through email, m.buning, buning at fsu.edu. I also have Twitter, so it's at Dr. Buning, at DRBUNING. I have Instagram, but I haven't done anything with it yet. So you can look me up there if you want. And I've started TikTok, but haven't done anything with that yet either. Trying to, if I want to go in that space. So I would say Twitter or email is going to be your best bet. Do take a look. If you're interested in furthering your education, we offer 2 options for you at Florida State. We have a graduate certificate, so you can get a certificate in athletic coaching, and then you can get a full master's degree in athletic coaching. These are both fully online. And you're going to get instruction from former coaches. We've shown it in the coaching realm, and we've also shown it in the academic realm. So we're kind of combining the two. And I appreciate you letting me talk about that. But it's been great sharing some information. And what I always tell my students is you're going to get it straight from me. So if you need a critical friend, could be one for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for taking time today and joining us. I absolutely enjoyed the conversation. It's been fantastic. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.